Welcome to Doctorates of the Absurd, your provider of belief on demand. What if your most intense personal passion, your deep love, your most, pure consciousness is actually the highest form of slavery? Okay, let's unpack this. We often think of freedom as the ability to define ourselves, to express our unique individual inner self. I mean, we spend our lives writing our story, right? Perfecting our narrative or pursuing the things that make us feel intensely alive. But what if the systems we use to achieve that self-expression, the very frameworks of language, identity, and meaning, what if they're actually the chains themselves? What if the focused, intense energy we pour into defining our story simply makes us better, more compliant, and, well, more effective components of a pre-existing machine?
That is the radical and I think almost terrifying starting point for this deep dive. We are tackling a massive, complex analysis of semiotic systems, or as the text we're looking at calls them, regimes of signs.
Right, and regimes of signs, that's a bit of a mouthful. What's a simple way to think about that?
If you want a quick translation, think of them as the fundamental operating systems. The OS that governs how human beings formalize expression, organize meaning, and most importantly, organize power.
So not just grammar rules.
Not at all. These are the code for reality itself. Our mission today is to map these systems, to really reveal the hidden logic behind how power structures manage knowledge, anxiety, and the very boundaries of freedom. And we're talking about structures that span from, say, ancient imperial courts and state bureaucracies, all the way down to modern self-help groups, therapy sessions.
Even the algorithm that dictates your social media feed.
Exactly. All these things, they're built on layers of organization, which the source calls strata. We are trying to understand the strata that govern meaning.
And we are focusing on a constant fundamental confrontation, a battle between two immense historical and psychological systems. And the key is that both of them are constantly and actively operating in your life right now. The first one, let's call it the old guard, is the signifying regime. This is the circular, despotic, and paranoid system. Its foundational mechanism is built on infinite redundancy, centralized power, and this idea of eternal, inescapable debt. When you are caught in this system, nothing is ever resolved.
That's the key. The sign always just refers back to itself, the circle always closes, and the debt is only ever deferred, never paid.
And its primary antagonist is the second system, the post-signifying regime.
Right. This is the linear, authoritarian, and passional system. It attempts to break that circularity, but it defines itself through this intense subjective grievance, the necessity of betrayal, and a kind of segmented, forward-moving line, a linear proceeding.
So it moves, but that movement carries its own immense cost.
A very high cost.
The core conflict, then, the true existential itch, seems to lie in the way signs behave in these two environments. In the first one, the sign just kicks you to another sign, and that one to another.
Kicking the can of meaning down the road infinitely.
And in the second, a sign detaches and runs a straight line of passion, but it's all focused inward on the self. And we need to show you precisely why both of these modes of operation, even though they feel radically different, are ultimately binding. They trap you in layers of interpretation or kind of self-annihilation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text is really addressing this profound, nagging human problem. The feeling of being fundamentally trapped within the systems of meaning we ourselves created. I mean, we are constantly struggling to find an expression, whether it's in love, politics, or art, that is not immediately co-opted. We're either drowned in the paranoia of infinite unresolved interpretation, what the text calls significance,
or we're annihilated by the intense self-slavery of our own passions, which is subjectification.
Exactly. Our goal today is to find the escape hatch beyond these two layers, these two strata.
So let's dive into the despotic system that seems to haunt all hierarchies, the signifying regime. And when we talk about despotism here, we aren't just talking about ancient kings, right?
No, not at all. We are talking about any system, any corporation, any relationship where power is utterly centralized and demands constant totalizing relevance.
This is the regime of eternal return and universal deception, and it's all built on this principle of the limitless network.
The key principle is deceptively simple and honestly terrifyingly effective. The rule is that in the signifying regime, every sign refers only to another sign, and only to another sign, ad infinitum.
Okay.
That's the limitlessness of significance. Let's break down what that actually means functionally. The sign in this system undergoes what is called relative deterritorialization.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Let's unpack that.
It is. But think of it this way. The sign is divorced from any fixed, real territory or object. Its primary purpose is not to say this is a tree. Its purpose is to create a formal chain, a network, without a beginning or an end. All signs are fundamentally signs of signs. If I say A, you immediately think B, and B makes you think C, and C just refers you back to the abstract concept of A. You never actually touch a concrete object.
And that's the mechanism that generates infinite debt. The meaning is always one sign away. It's always deferred.
Always.
Here's where it gets really interesting and where the system projects its shadow onto the world. This limitless network projects itself onto what the source calls an amorphous atmospheric continuum, which tries to play the role of the signified.
A great phrase.
It is. Think of it like a smog or a cloud of generalized anxiety. The specific contents of the world just dissolve into this atmosphere. The world stops signifying a specific thing or event.
And instead, the world begins to signify before anyone knows what it signifies.
Everything is extracted and generalized. You're just left with a pervasive ambient feeling of meaning.
And this leads directly to the terrifying omnipresence of meaning, which is, well, it's paranoia.
Right.
Imagine being the paranoiac, the one who lives fully inside this regime. Your boss gave you a funny look. You received an unexpected email. You saw 2 leaves positioned on the sidewalk in a specific way.
It all means something.
It all means something. The source notes that even if you encounter something utterly mundane like stepping in dog waste, it doesn't matter what it means. It's still signifying. The sign is so redundant and pervasive, it's everywhere, that everything becomes a potential signal directed at you.
And what's fascinating is the psychological conquest the paranoiac makes. They sort of embody the regime. They feel the impotence of this deterritorialized sign assailing them from every direction.
But they conquer that feeling of being a passive recipient through what the text calls the royal feeling of wrath.
Wrath, so they get angry.
They get angry, and they view themselves as the master of the very network that is attacking them. It's the logic of, I know they are attacking me, and therefore I am the only one who truly understands the system.
Which gives them a sense of control and profound importance, even if it's based entirely on delusion and, endless interpretation.
This self-reinforcing delusion leads directly to the core control mechanism of the system: circularity and interpretosis.
Interpretosis.
The entire system is structured to generate infinite debt and ensure that nothing is ever truly resolved or completed. The sign survives its concrete object, it survives its signified meaning, and it survives its owner. It's kept in reserve and leaps like an animal or a dead person to regain its place in the chain.
That's the eternal return in practice.
Exactly.
But the circularity isn't just one closed loop. It's a multiplicity of circles and spirals nested within each other. A sign can refer to others in its immediate circle, or it can jump to signs in entirely different higher circles. And these jumps are regulated, right? By the bureaucracy or the priests.
Precisely. We need to spend some time on this idea of jumping, because it really clarifies the difference between a linear segment and an imperial circular system. The source uses Robert Lowy's comparison of 2 Native American peoples whose wives cheated. The Crow Indian, belonging to a nomadic hunter-gatherer tradition, reacts linearly.
Okay, what does he do?
He slashes his wife's face. It's a direct, intense action that concludes the segment. A wrong was committed, a punishment was delivered, segment ended. Very direct.
But the Hopi Indian, who belongs to an imperial tradition with a really sophisticated ritual and political organization, he reacts with total circularity.
He keeps his calm, he withdraws, and he prays for drought and famine to descend on the entire village.
The whole village. Why?
Because for the Hopi, a domestic disturbance, a mere marital spat, calls into question the entire system of the universe.
Wow.
The Hopi executes this brilliant, terrifying jump. He jumps from the intimate domestic circle to the vast cosmological circle. He believes the levels of the universe are connected by these multiple, complex correspondences managed by the central power.
So his wife's act isn't just a personal failure.
No, it's a failure of the cosmic order represented by the despotic center. This jump from circle to circle, constantly escalating and displacing the problem, is the hysteric operation of the deceiver as subject, answering to the paranoid despot. Deception, displacement, and infinite escalation are fundamental here.
So if the system is constantly displacing meaning and escalating problems like this, how does it hold together? I mean, if signs are constantly deterritorialized, how do you prevent total chaos or entropy?
That's where the mechanism of interpretance or interpretation comes in. To maintain the system, you need someone, the interpretive priest, the seer, the analyst, the bureaucrat, who ensures the system stays fed.
Stays fed.
They ensure that the signified constantly re-imparts signifier, thereby making the abstracted content knowable and generating more signifier to feed the circular machine.
This process is interpretosis interpretation carried to infinity.
Exactly. And the priest's deception is that interpretation never encounters anything that isn't already an interpretation. The search for the ultimate signified, the real true meaning, is just the signifier itself in its redundancy.
The meaning is always the sign itself. It's an empty loop.
A totally empty loop. And this is why the source makes a direct connection to modern psychoanalysis. They note that psychoanalysts, like ancient priests, discovered that interpretation must be subordinated to significance.
So what does that look like in practice?
The most profound, the best interpretation, is often a significant silence or a minimal intervention, which just fuels the subject's own neurotic cycle. The patient is jumping from one circle of memory or guilt to the next, never encountering production, only the reproduction of the dead.
So the psychoanalyst in this critique acts as another bureaucrat of the despotic system. They're just managing the debt, not resolving it.
That's the critique, yes.
That's a powerful critique. So if the pure abstract principle of the signifier needs a substance, a way to be housed physically and perceptually, what is the structure that crystallizes all this redundancy?
That substance is faciality. The face is not merely a biological feature. It is the physical semiotic mechanism that acts as the screen where all these redundancies converge.
The scream.
The face emits and receives, it releases and recaptures signifying signs. Faciality is the icon internal to the signifying regime. It is the place where the signifier reterritorializes, giving it material weight.
So faciality is essentially the system's branding, the visual interface for the despotic network.
Exactly. And the implication is that the despot-god never hides his face. The mask is the face because everything that is public by virtue of the face, constantly under surveillance. Think of the state seal, the emperor's portrait, or the corporate logo. They are all mechanisms of faciality, crystallizing the abstract debt into a recognizable, omnipresent image.
And when the face is effaced, when those faciality traits disappear.
We know the despotic regime has broken down.
But no system of power is complete without its opposition. The despot-god brandishes this solar face, the central signifier. But the circular system needs a counterbody, too.
It does. The body of the tortured or the excluded, the scapegoat.
These two bodies, the face and the scapegoat, they communicate. But the scapegoat is fundamentally one who loses their face, entering into a becoming animal or becoming molecular.
Right. The scapegoat is charged with everything that resisted the signifying signs, everything that eluded that perpetual referral from sign to sign through the circles. They are the garbage dump for the system's failures.
The text details the ancient rite. A first expiatory animal is sacrificed, but a second animal is driven away into the desert wilderness. It's not just a sacrifice. It's an expulsion of the line of flight itself.
This is critical. The scapegoat incarnates a line of absolute deterritorialization. A total escape, a line of flight that exceeds the system's own relative control deterritorialization.
And the signifying regime has to condemn this line as negative.
It has to, precisely because it represents true freedom from the circles. It's a tangent to the signifying circles, placed under a curse. The system offers you a choice. Submit to the solar face of the god, order, interpretation, debt, or be utterly excluded, faceless, and driven into the chaotic desert.
The goat's anus, the final anonymous expulsion, stands opposite the solar face of the god. It forces a binary choice.
A very stark choice.
This complete and frankly dreary system, the paranoid face, the interpreting priests, the hysterical crowd-jumping circles, and the faceless, depressive scapegoat, it applies not just to imperial regimes, but critically to all subjected, arborescent, hierarchical-centered groups.
That's the crucial link to today. Political parties, literary movements.
The rules of a marriage, a corporate structure, the face, redundancy, significance, and interpretation are at work everywhere, reigning over every domestic squabble and state apparatus, ensuring that infinite loop of debt continues.
So to summarize this deeply entrenched system before we move on, the signifying regime is defined by 1. Sign-to-sign reflow, which creates the limitlessness of debt. 2. Circular return. 3. That hysterical jumping from circle to circle, which is deception.
4. Interpretosis, which generates more signifier.
5. The despotic center, represented by the solar face. And 6. The negative, faceless line of flight, represented by the scapegoat. It is a system built entirely on universal deception.
Okay. So if the signifying regime is despotic and paranoid, its main historical opponent, the one that attempts to break the circularity, is the post-signifying regime.
Correct. This is the authoritarian passional system, and it is defined by a singular procedure. Subjectification.
Subjectification.
Instead of everything radiating from the center in circles,
The deterritorialized sign detaches and runs a straight line, a linear proceeding. This line is assigned a positive sign, defining itself not through adherence to the center, but through the singular, intense passion of the subject or the people following that line.
The classic example the source uses is the Jewish people detaching from the Egyptian imperial network. Their movement into the desert is a line of flight.
That takes the negative scapegoat line, the one cast out into the desert, and flips its sign. It becomes the positive line of their subjectivity, their passion, their profound grievance.
And the destruction of the temple twice meant the fixed center was replaced by the mobile arc.
A portable packet of signs, which the people follow. So the system is no longer organized around a physical center, it's organized around a spiritual trajectory.
This is a monumental shift in the definition of power and identity. The old formula was, let the scapegoat carry off our misfortune and debt. The new formula is,
let misfortune befall us. We will embrace the burden. The line of the scapegoat is married and flipped to the positive line of passion. The image is inverted.
the god who, like a lion, was given blood sacrifice must be shoved into the background, and the sacrifice god must occupy the foreground.
We're no longer defined by the system we flee. We're defined by the burden we carry. We will be our own scapegoat.
And faciality transforms dramatically to reflect this. So instead of the frontal solar face of the despot,
The new god must avert his face, which must be seen by no one. And the subject, in turn, averts their own face. This double turning away, the profile, replaces the radiant, totalizing face. It draws the positive line of flight, defining the boundary of the unique individual subject.
and crucially, the mechanism of control changes from universal deception to betrayal.
Yes. In the signifying regime, everyone lies to keep the circle closed. In the post-signifying regime, power operates through a necessary betrayal. The prophet like Cain, Jonah, or Jesus is the main figure, and he is fundamentally a traitor who fulfills God's order more effectively by fleeing, declining, or even disobeying than by obeying.
Betrayal becomes an idea fix, a fixed idea that defines the subject.
The story of Jonah is the perfect, elegant illustration of this. God calls him to go preach in Nineveh. Jonah immediately flees in the opposite direction, far from the face of Adonai.
She's disobeying.
Completely. Yet, in fleeing, Jonah takes the evil of Nineveh upon himself. He forces God to reevaluate the covenant. By disobeying, he anticipates God's will more effectively than if he had simply followed the command. The result is the possibility of an alliance, a covenant, maintaining existence under a reprieve, unlike the brutal execution or exclusion of the imperial system.
But while this new system seems freer, more subjective, and maybe more moral than the despot, let's turn to the critique. How does the system create its own slavery?
The post-signifying regime finds its origin in the cogito as the point of subjectification. This point of subjectification is the catalyst for the passional line. For Descartes, it was the certainty of the I think.
But it could be anything.
It could be anything. For a couple, it might be the intensity of their shared gaze. For an obsessive, it might be food or a specific habit. It is the core, subjective anchor that allows the linear proceeding to start.
And the system is primarily defined by a structural phenomenon, the doubling of two subjects. This is the core engine of subjectification.
Precisely. You have the subject of enunciation, the I think, the mental reality, the one that issues from the point of subjectification, and you have the subject of the statement, the I walk, I suffer, the one that conforms to dominant reality.
And the mechanism of subjection is what's called the recoil.
Yes, the subject of enunciation recoils back into the subject of the statement. Linguists acknowledge this as the imprint of the process of enunciation in the statement. The subject of the statement becomes the operational guarantor of the subject of enunciation.
So the statement you make about the world guarantees the certainty of the self that made the statement.
You've got it.
So if I say, I believe climate change is real, the statement, climate change is real, proves the existence of the rational self, I believe, who holds the opinion. The statement grounds the self. This is the genius and, I guess, the tragedy of this new authoritarian form of power.
The power is made immanent. It melts with the real and operates through normalization rather than transcendence. And the critique here is piercing. This is a new form of slavery, being slave to oneself or to pure reason, the cogito.
Wait, I have to challenge that. I mean, we are told constantly that reason and self-control are the highest forms of freedom and autonomy. How is obeying the rational self a form of slavery?
Because the paradox is that the more you obey the dominant reality, the more you conform to what are considered rational statements, norms, and behaviors, the more you feel in command as a rational being.
Because I'm choosing it.
You believe you are obeying yourself, the rational legislator subject, because your consciousness has become a double. Self. You've internalized the chain of command. The intensity you feel in your passion or reason is directed toward proving the reality of the statement, thereby guaranteeing your own subjective existence. Which is why the source asks, is there anything more passional than pure reason, or colder than the cogito?
So capital could be a point of subjectification.
Par excellence. You invest your passion and your subjective self into conforming to the economic statement. I am a worker, I am a consumer, I am successful. Similarly, psychoanalysis, when operating in this regime, uses this doubling. The patient assumes the burden of interpretation, the subject of enunciation, I think my way out of this, but remains the eternally psychoanalyzed subject, the subject of the statement, submissive to the dominant psychological reality.
This doubling, this intense self-reflexive coil, doesn't just happen in solitary thought. It happens most intensely in the love couple, a manhit, the passional double.
That's absolute.
Think of the great romantic tragedies. Tristan and Isolde's cry for mutual self-destruction is the cogito built for two.
Yeah.
They're drawn toward the black hole of self-consciousness, carried toward death. The two subjects, enunciation and statement, constantly switch places in an intense mutual expression.
Guaranteeing the reality of the love through the passion. I am real because you intensely confirm my reality.
And this intense passion has its inevitable fall, which the text calls the domestic squabble, the war cogito.
Strindberg captured this perfectly, detailing the moment where the fight devolves into thought theft. You're stealing my thoughts. Each partner attempts to steal the other's subject of enunciation while reducing the other to a mere subject of the statement. The result? Conjugality becomes the development of the couple, and bureaucracy the development of the cogito, often overlapping in an amorous bureaucracy where the debt of self-affirmation is constantly traded.
So whether we are caught in the circular, paranoid debt of the signifying regime or the linear, self-annihilating passion of the post-signifying regime, we are still bound. We are still on the strata, organized into layers of meaning that dictate our expression.
That is the crucial realization. Both significance and subjectification, despite their differences, are strata layers of organization that bind human beings by segmenting and formalizing expression and content. To escape, we need a third, truly creative path.
Which is?
Positive, absolute deterritorialization. We need to bypass the entire architecture of meaning-making as we know it.
Before we discuss the escape, we need to clearly define the trap of redundancy that holds us within these two stratas. How do they keep us stuck?
The signifying regime achieves its redundancy through frequency redundancy. Signs are tallied, interpreted, and managed on a wall in relation to one another and the central signifier. It is relative deterritorialization because the signs leave their fixed objects but immediately reterritorialize on the face or the debt cycle.
And the post-signifying regime, the passional one.
It uses subjective resonance. This involves shifters, personal pronouns, and proper names focused entirely on the black hole of consciousness and passion. Tristan calls Isolde. Isolde calls Tristan. The resonance confirms the intensity, drawing them both toward abolition, toward death.
The paradox here is absolutely vital for you to understand. Subjectification carries deterritorialization to the absolute, meaning maximum intensity. The passion is all-consuming.
But this intensity is still negative because it is segmented and directed toward its own abolition, its own impotence, its own end. Every consciousness, coiled in on itself, pursues its own end. This absolute deterritorialization is blocked because the segmented linear proceeding is always forced to stop and recommence when the subject of enunciation hits the wall of the statement.
So we have the circular wall of infinite debt on one side and the segmented black hole of self-annihilation on the other. If the trap is in the systems of meaning themselves, in the strata, the solution must lie in changing planes entirely. How do we break the pattern and achieve positive, not negative, absolute deterritorialization?
The solution lies on the plane of consistency or the abstract machine. We must stop being bound by the strata of the organism, of significance and of subjectification.
The abstract machine. That sounds, well, abstract.
It is, but it's the core concept of escape. To understand it, think of it as pure matter function. It has no pre-existing form or substance of its own. It knows nothing of the distinction between content, like bodies, objects, territories, and expression, signs, words, semiotics. It operates by unformed traits and cutting edges, what the source calls particle signs, drawing a single, unified, destratified plane.
So if it's not tied to form or substance, it doesn't represent reality, right? It's not a map of what is.
Precisely. The abstract machine does not represent reality. It constructs a real that is yet to come. It plays a piloting role, always existing prior to history, prior to the strata, It's the ultimate source code, dictating what can happen, not what has happened. It's the conjunction of maximum deterritorialization of content and maximum deterritorialization of expression, creating a shared positive acceleration.
Can you give us a functional analogy? If the signifying regime is like a corporate memo that only refers to previous memos, and the post-signifying regime is like a diary of internal psychological turmoil, what is the abstract machine?
Think of it like a new scientific diagram or a technological breakthrough. A Wagner abstract machine, for instance, isn't about the music on the page or the story of the opera. It's defined by the double deterritorialization of the human voice and the orchestral instruments, creating a new functional possibility for sound.
Okay.
Or a Goya abstract machine in mathematics. It isn't about the numbers. It's defined by an arbitrary line that conjugates with a starting body, creating a new mathematical function that was impossible under previous arithmetic strata. They are abstract, yes, but they are real because they create new possibilities.
To utilize this plane, we have to stop the reflexive redundancy of consciousness and passion. The critiques of the cogito was that it was a black hole, a segmented self-reflexive coil.
We must make consciousness and experimentation in life, and passion, a field of continuous intensities, and in doing so, escape the black hole of abolition. This means desubjectifying consciousness and passion. Instead of using the I think to reaffirm my own existence, I must use it for a becoming animal or becoming molecular.
And this becoming is not literal imitation. I'm not supposed to act like a wolf.
Not at all. It is functional. It means connecting your personal intensity to the abstract machine, to the non-human logic of the world. It means connecting your body, your thoughts, and your passions to the great outside, using the, I think, not as an anchor for identity, but as a tool for continuous experimentation and transformation.
Using love not for mutual self-destruction,
but for a becoming woman of man, escaping rigid gender strata and embracing the potential for continuous intensity.
The entire study we are conducting here is fundamentally pragmatics. It's the mapping of these transformations and the creation of new regimes of signs. It's about how to get from the paranoid desk job to the plane of consistency.
And a semiotic transformation is not mere translation. It's not saying the same thing in a different language. It is a creative act that diverts a statement from its origin, actively resisting the dominant regime by assigning words and organs to new functions.
So there are different ways to transform things, but only one truly breaks free.
The source identifies 5 types, but the only one that truly achieves freedom is the diagrammatic transformation. The others are analogical, which is a regression into older pre-signifying regimes, often through ritual or drugs. Symbolic, which is a move into the signifying regime, where the signifier takes power, like in a religious cult.
Okay.
Then there's polemical or strategic, which is counter-signifying, like a war machine that still defines itself against the enemy. And consciousness-related or mimetic, which is post-signifying, focused on the subject, like intense therapy.
So the ultimate test of creativity is determining whether our attempts to break free are merely crazy talk that still signifies and interprets, still feeding the debt cycle, or if we have truly found a signifying diagram.
That's the challenge.
We must follow the injunction that the source cites, which Don Juan gives to Castaneda when he is stuck in interpretation. Stop, you're making me tired. Experiment, don't signify, and interpret.
This transformation appeals to variables that stop the flow of interpretation, allowing you to stop the world, not through magic, but through pragmatic, destratified creativity.
The creation of a new, pure regime of signs, then, is only possible through this diagrammatic transformation, through the emergence of new abstract machines. We must search for these assignments of words and organs that result in a patois of sensual delight, where the connections are functional and creative.
Where syntax, semantics, and logic are in collapse, because they have been replaced by the functional reality of the abstract machine. That is the process of genuine creation, bypassing both the face and the black hole entirely.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to navigate your daily life? We have mapped 2 competing realities that seek to bind us through language and meaning. The paranoid circular system of the despot's face, defined by universal deception and infinite debt.
And the linear, passionate system of the self-enslaved cogito, defined by universal betrayal and the black hole of self-annihilation.
The secret of freedom, then, lies in activating the diagrammatic function, which bypasses both, moving from the strata of organization to the plane of consistency.
Let's distill 3 critical takeaways from this deep dive into the regimes of signs. First, and perhaps most provocatively, is the nature of the psychoanalyst as priest. This analysis asserts that psychoanalysis is a mixed semiotic that uses techniques from both the signifying and post-signifying strata.
And the source material is explicit in its critique.
Very. It says the analyst often just switches roles. The analyst signifies, through silence, minimal intervention, or defining terms, and the patient interprets, fueling the neurotic cycle of infinite debt, that interpretosis we talked about. It keeps the debt active.
The practical implication here is profound. If you are constantly looking inward, excavating your childhood, or trying to find the meaning of your behavior, you are rooting around in a prefab childhood constructed by Western semiology.
That's why the source urges. We should aim to semiotize yourself instead of rooting around in your prefab childhood. The path to freedom is not an internal excavation of guilt and debt, but a creative outward transformation, a construction of a new machine.
The second takeaway.
Second, and this is crucial for anyone engaging with politics, technology, or culture, is the realization that language is political and functional. There is no universal, pure logic or grammar that floats above these systems of meaning, as philosophers have often claimed. Language is not transcendental. It is based on regimes of signs.
And regimes of signs are based on abstract machines that go far beyond linguistics.
Exactly. The source makes it clear that evaluating something as grammatically correct or logically pure is a political matter, tied to the authority of the regime that organizes that language.
The idea that language could be transcendentalized, from Russell's logic to Chomsky's grammar,
Is labeled the worst kind of abstraction because it validates a level that is both too abstract to be useful for creation and not abstract enough to reach the plane of consistency. Language is based on specific, historically bound assemblages of enunciation, and those assemblages are tied directly to organizations of power.
And the third takeaway.
Third, and this connects directly back to the seductive nature of the post-signifying regime, is the danger of the black hole. As humans, we naturally valorize the highest intensity of consciousness or passion, the cry of the lover, the absolute certainty of the rational mind.
But we have to remember this intensity is often absolute, yet negative.
Because it is segmented and coiled inward, directed toward its own abolition and impotence.
If your intense passion or consciousness is only confirming your identity as a subject, if it's just the cogito echoing itself, you are spiraling toward the black hole.
True. Creative power is found only in positive deterritorialization making consciousness, a continuous experimentation on the plane of consistency, not a self-reflexive coil. It's about opening yourself to the outside, the functional reality of the abstract machine, rather than folding back into the self.
This raises an important question for you to take into your week. If we're all caught between despotic circularity and passional self-slavery, what single, completely mundane habit in your daily life, an email routine, a favorite anxiety, the way you argue with your partner, or your scrolling mechanism, is actually a tiny repeating microcosm of the signifying regime? Find that knot of arborescence, that place where every sign just refers you to another, never achieving a resolution, only accruing more debt. Find that specific small habit, that loop. Then ask yourself how you can stammer language, be a foreigner in your own tongue, and transform that habit into a creative line of flight, detaching that sign and giving it a positive, functional direction, not toward a black hole of identity, but toward the open field of continuous experimentation. That's for you to discover next. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you soon.